On a cold Thanksgiving night, I watched my husband open the trunk of his car, and there they were, the very gifts I had bought with love for my family, stolen and wrapped for someone else. In that moment, my world cracked open, and I realized I had been living beside a stranger. If stories of truth and resilience speak to you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed, or simply share in the comments where you're listening from. It always warms me to know who's out there walking with me through these memories. Tell me, how do you think your heart would have endured such a discovery? And wherever you are tonight, may peace and kindness rest with you. The town of Springfield, Illinois, in the late 1960s was not the busy, restless city that many might imagine when they hear its name today. Back then, in our little corner of the Midwest, life moved with a slower rhythm, one marked by church bells on Sunday mornings, the rustle of cornfields bending under the autumn winds, and the chatter of neighbours who all seemed to know each other's business. The houses on our street stood close but proud, brick and white siding glowing against the soft golden haze of November afternoons. By Thanksgiving, the air turned crisp and sharp, carrying the smell of chimney smoke, roasted turkey, and pies cooling on kitchen counters. It was in this town, at the age of just 17, that I became Mrs. Margaret Dawson. Arthur Dawson, the man I married, was a striking figure back then. Tall, always neatly dressed in his tailored suits, a salesman of fine textiles who seemed to charm every shopkeeper and neighbour he encountered. To our community, Arthur was a man of success, respectable and steady, and to me, he was my whole world. Our home was comfortable, decorated with a sense of pride that matched our standing, and every Thanksgiving we opened our doors wide, filling the dining room with family, food, and laughter. But hidden beneath the laughter, there was something else, a shadow, and that shadow came in the form of Arthur's sudden disappearances. Every Thanksgiving night, when the meal had ended and the family settled into stories and games, my husband vanished. He would glance at his watch, fidgeting as though time itself pulled him away, and then with the same excuse each year. An important client, he would say, a man whose business can only be done tonight. He slipped away into the darkness. I remember the first time it happened, in 1966. I was 24, still young enough to believe that love explained everything, young enough to convince myself that loyalty could mask suspicion. That evening, after the table was cleared and the leftovers tucked safely into the icebox, Arthur leaned toward me, kissed my cheek, and murmured that he had business to attend to. I laughed softly, confused. On Thanksgiving night, Arthur? Who works on a holiday? But he had already reached for his coat, straightening his tie in the mirror. He left with a smile, promising not to be gone long. 2 hours later, he returned, smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. I told myself not to worry. I told myself it was just business. I told myself, as so many wives did in those years, that men carried burdens we didn't always understand. But then, something else happened. The next morning, as I gathered the gifts I had carefully hidden away for my sisters and parents, little treasures I had bought with quiet excitement, one of them was gone. A silk scarf, pale blue with delicate stitching along the edges. I turned the house upside down, searching for it, my hands trembling as I rifled through drawers and closets. When I asked Arthur, he simply shrugged, his eyes sliding past mine, and said I must have imagined buying it at all. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that he was right, that I had somehow confused my memory. But deep down, I knew better. A woman knows when something precious has been taken from her. even if she cannot yet name what it is. The years that followed only deepened that shadow. In 1967, the family gathered again around our table, the turkey carved, the pumpkin pies devoured, the wine flowing. Laughter filled the air, cousins chasing each other through the halls, my mother's knitting needles clicking by the fire. It was, by all appearances, a perfect evening. Yet I felt Arthur's restlessness even before he rose from the table. He kept looking at the clock, his fork idle on his plate. Then, with the same rehearsed smile, he excused himself, whispering about a client he could not disappoint. I watched him leave that night with a heart that beat too quickly, my hands cold in my lap. When he returned, 2 hours later, I noticed it immediately. The scent, not the crisp, woody aftershave I had given him that very morning, but something sweeter, something unmistakably feminine clinging to his collar. And there, a faint smudge of lipstick, red against white cotton, quickly hidden by the way he turned up his collar. I did not confront him then. I wanted to, but my voice seemed trapped in my chest, buried under layers of fear and denial. Instead, I spent the night staring at the ceiling once more, listening to his even breathing beside me while my mind raced in circles. The following morning, as I prepared the gifts to distribute among my family, another surprise awaited me. A pocket watch, silver with my father's initials engraved inside, was missing. I searched every drawer, every box, certain I had placed it carefully in the linen chest. But it was gone. When I mentioned it to Arthur, he dismissed me again, his words sharp with impatience. "You probably left it at the shop," he said. "Don't trouble yourself over it." It was the impatience that stung more than the dismissal, for in his tone I recognized something dangerous, the beginning of contempt, the slow erosion of respect. Still, I chose silence. In those years, silence felt safer than accusation. I told myself that good wives endured, that marriage required patience, that suspicion could be poisonous if left unchecked. But deep inside, something was changing in me. By 1968, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Thanksgiving dinner came and went, the house filled once again with warmth and laughter. Yet at the stroke of 9, Arthur slipped away, leaving me with an ache in my chest that no holiday joy could cover. He returned smelling of perfume, his smile practiced, his tie slightly loosened. And once again, a gift vanished. This time, a soft cashmere shawl meant for my mother. That was the moment when my denial began to crumble. I stared at the empty space in the drawer where the shawl had been and felt something harden inside me. It was as though the air in our home had shifted, as though a draught had blown through the windows, carrying with it the truth I had long avoided. I tried to cling to the life we had built, to the image of Arthur that our neighbours admired, the successful salesman, the attentive husband who brought flowers home on Fridays, who tipped his hat to passers-by. But the truth was already gnawing at the edges of my carefully constructed world. Friends began to whisper, their eyes glancing toward me with pity I did not understand. A cousin casually mentioned seeing Arthur in the company of a younger woman, her smile too familiar, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I brushed it aside, forcing laughter, but my insides twisted with dread. And so the years rolled on, each Thanksgiving marked not only by turkey and cranberry sauce, but by an absence I could no longer ignore. Each year, Arthur vanished for 2 hours, and each year, something of mine disappeared with him. A gift, a piece of trust, a fragment of the life I thought was secure. I told myself I still loved him. I told myself that families had their secrets, that marriages carried burdens unseen by others. Yet as I stood by the window that cold November night in 1968, watching the taillights of his car fade into the distance, I felt the first real crack in the foundation of our life together. It was in that silence, in that long wait for his return, that the truth began to take shape. And when he finally walked back through the door, his smile rehearsed, his collar turned just so, I saw it clearly for the first time. A trace of lipstick, faint but undeniable, staining the fabric that brushed against my cheek. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't yet know where he went, or who awaited him, or why my gifts had vanished like smoke. But I knew that something dark lay beneath the surface of our life, something I could no longer pretend not to see. Thanksgiving of 1967 arrived with the kind of beauty only the Midwest can offer. The air in Springfield was sharp and clear. The trees outside our window stripped bare by November winds, their branches scratching lightly against the glass. Inside, the house glowed with warmth, every corner filled with voices, the clinking of silverware, and the rich aroma of roasted turkey drifting from the kitchen. Pumpkin pies cooled on the counter, their spiced sweetness mingling with the scent of nutmeg and cinnamon. My dining table stretched to its limits, polished oak gleaming under candlelight, and every seat was filled with family leaning in close, laughter echoing like music. The feast unfolded just as I had hoped. Turkey carved with care, cranberry sauce passed from hand to hand, stories traded across the table as wine glasses caught the glow of the chandelier. My mother hummed softly while arranging her plate. My sisters teased one another like schoolgirls, and my father's laughter boomed louder than anyone's, filling the room with a sense of home and tradition. For a few hours, it felt as though nothing in the world could intrude on this picture of American holiday perfection. But even then, my heart carried a quiet unease, one I tried to ignore as I refilled plates and straightened napkins. It happened again, as though scripted. Just after dessert, when the table still glistened with crumbs of pie and coffee cups steamed in the chill of late evening, Arthur's gaze shifted to the clock. His fork lay idle, his smile a shade too polished, his body restless in a way only I seemed to notice. With his usual charm, he leaned close, whispered about a client too important to neglect, and slipped into his coat. I pressed my lips into a polite smile, nodding though my hands trembled beneath the tablecloth. The door closed behind him, and with it, the warmth of the room seemed to waver. 2 hours later, the door opened again. Arthur's shoes tapped against the hardwood floor, his face bright with that same impeccable smile. But something betrayed him. A scent followed him in, cloying, unmistakably feminine, a perfume far too sweet and lingering to have come from a man's handshake or a crowded dining room. It clung to him, to the fabric of his suit, stronger than the faint aftershave I had carefully wrapped for him that very morning. As he bent to hang his coat, the air filled with the sweet heaviness of that fragrance, and though no one else seemed to notice, I could not escape it. The next morning, the unease hardened into certainty. As I set aside the gifts I had prepared, my hands searching through the linen chest where I kept them safe, I felt the air drain from the room. My father's gift, a silver pocket watch engraved with his initials, was gone. The spot where I had placed it stood bare, the box no longer nestled between the folded linens. I searched every drawer, lifted every cushion, even turned to the attic in desperation. But it was nowhere. I asked Arthur, voice steady though my pulse raced, if he had seen it. He looked at me with casual dismissal, that same wave of the hand he used in business deals. You probably forgot to bring it home, Margaret. Don't trouble yourself. His words struck me harder than any shout could have. The pocket watch wasn't just a trinket. It was a symbol of respect for my father, a man who had laboured his entire life with steady hands and unwavering discipline. I had chosen it carefully, saved from my own household allowance to buy it. To have it vanish, and worse, to be told I was imagining things, carved a wound in me that no polite smile could cover. The whispers began not long after. At a family gathering later that winter, a cousin mentioned it offhand, the way people do when they don't yet know the weight of their words. I thought I saw Arthur at the Central Hotel the other week, she said, her fork tapping lightly against her plate. He was having lunch with a young woman. Pretty girl, maybe in her 20s. They looked close. Her eyes flicked toward me, curious, then back to her plate. I forced a laugh, my cheeks burning as I reached for my glass of water. Later, when I asked Arthur about it, he didn't hesitate. She's just a client's daughter, he said smoothly, his tone carrying just the right amount of indifference. I'm helping her father with a business matter. Don't read into it. His gaze was steady, his smile polished, but his words felt rehearsed, the kind of lines one repeats often enough to believe in their own performance. For weeks after, I tried to bury the suspicion. I threw myself into preparing meals, polishing silver, keeping the house warm and inviting as if routine could drown out doubt. But silence grew heavy, a presence that haunted me even in the brightest daylight. Every time Arthur left the room, I found myself listening for the faint trace of perfume on his clothes, searching for signs I could not name aloud. Then came Thanksgiving of 1968. The house looked as it always did. Pies on the counter, the turkey browned to perfection, my father carving slices with pride, and Arthur smiling as though nothing in the world could be amiss. Yet when I reached for the shawl I had set aside for my mother, a soft cashmere wrap chosen with such care, it too was gone. The pattern repeated itself like a cruel joke, leaving me with nothing but questions that had no safe answers. It was then that Laura, my dearest friend since childhood, pulled me aside. We sat in her kitchen, steam rising from mugs of tea, the ticking clock on the wall filling the silence. Her eyes were kind, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "Margaret," she whispered, "I don't know how to tell you this. I saw Arthur downtown last week. He was at the jeweller's. He bought a gold bracelet. Expensive. But I know it wasn't for you. You deserve to know." Her words settled over me like snow, cold and suffocating, melting into a dread I could not shake. My breath caught, my chest heavy with the weight of truths I had tried to deny. A gold bracelet for someone else, while gifts meant for my family vanished from my home. And in that moment, I realized the shadow was no longer just a shadow. It was a storm gathering at the edges of my life, waiting to break. It was Thanksgiving of 1969, and the house was alive with familiar sounds. The low hum of conversation, the scrape of silverware, the crackle of logs in the fireplace. Outside, the Illinois air carried a bitter chill, the kind that turned windows to frosted glass and made every breath a plume in the night. Inside, though, the warmth of family pressed close, candlelight flickering across faces that glowed with wine and cheer. I had dressed carefully that year, smoothing the folds of a pale blue dress, fastening the pearls my mother once gave me, hoping the night would quiet the unease that had grown heavier with each passing holiday. In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, I had stumbled upon something that stirred a strange hope in my chest. While putting away Arthur's overcoat one afternoon, my hand brushed against the lining and felt a hidden weight. Slipping my fingers inside, I drew out a small velvet box, dark blue and soft against my palm. My breath caught as I opened it. Nestled within was a string of pearls, gleaming under the dim light, each one perfectly round, luminous as if they held their own secret light. For a moment, my heart softened. Perhaps this was the proof I needed, that Arthur still thought of me, that his distance and late-night absences were nothing more than business after all. I closed the box, pressed it to my chest, and told myself that come Thanksgiving night, he would slip it into my hands with that charming smile, and I would feel foolish for doubting him. But the evening did not bring reassurance. The turkey browned perfectly, the table crowded with roasted vegetables and pumpkin pie dusted with spice, yet I could not taste any of it. Every sound, every laugh from my sisters, every story told by my father seemed muffled under the drumbeat of my heart. Arthur sat at the head of the table, as he always did, carving the turkey with practiced ease, his voice smooth and genial, his glass raised in cheer. But I noticed how often his eyes flicked to the clock on the wall, how his hand tapped lightly against the tablecloth when he thought no one was watching. By the time dessert was cleared and the younger cousins had settled on the floor to play board games, he pushed back his chair with that same smile and the same excuse. A client, a meeting, only an hour or two, nothing to worry over. The door closed behind him, and in that moment, something inside me refused to be quiet any longer. I could not carry the weight of silence alone. I found Paul in the den, leaning against the mantel with his long frame, nursing a glass of bourbon. My younger brother, tall and lean at 25, with kind eyes that had always watched out for me since childhood. His dark hair curled slightly at the edges. His jacket hung loose around his shoulders, but his presence was steady, grounding. When I told him everything, the unease, the perfume, the missing gifts, and now the velvet box of pearls, the words spilled out like water breaking through a dam. My hands shook as I spoke, but his never faltered. He listened, brow furrowed, jaw tight, until finally he set down his glass and placed a hand firmly on my shoulder. "Enough, Margaret," he said quietly, though his eyes burned. "You deserve the truth. Tonight, we find out." Minutes later, we slipped out into the cold. His old Chevrolet rumbled to life, headlights cutting across the quiet suburban streets as we kept a careful distance behind Arthur's sleek sedan. The town faded away, storefronts giving way to darkened stretches of road. The silence between us broken only by the sound of tires against pavement. My pulse raced with every turn, every mile we followed. I pressed my hands together in my lap, knuckles white, a prayer forming silently though no words came. After 20 minutes, Arthur turned into a neighborhood I rarely visited, a place of wealth and manicured lawns, where wide driveways led to homes with stone facades and stately porches. Holiday lights glittered from windows, casting soft colors across the snow-dusted yards. He slowed, then pulled to a stop before a 2-story house with tall white columns and a sprawling lawn trimmed to perfection. Even from a distance, I could see the glow of a Christmas tree through the wide front window, its ornaments shining like fragments of glass stars. Paul parked a few houses away, killing the headlights. We sat in silence, breath fogging the windshield as Arthur stepped out of his car. He moved with deliberate care, glancing around as though to make certain no one saw him. My stomach knotted as he walked to the back of the car, lifting the trunk. From where we sat, the sight struck me like a blow. Packages wrapped in silver paper, boxes tied with gold ribbon, gifts that were achingly familiar. I recognized them instantly. The silk scarf I had bought for my sister, the silver watch meant for my father, the cashmere shawl I had chosen for my mother. Each one pulled from the shadows of the trunk, each one stolen from my home, from my heart, repurposed as if they had never belonged to us. My breath caught in my throat, a sob stifled behind my lips. Arthur cradled the packages in his arms, stacking them with practiced ease, and in the glow of the street lamp, the sight was undeniable. Beside me, Paul's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, his jaw set hard. "That son of a—" he muttered, but his words trailed off, replaced by a silence heavy with rage and disbelief. My eyes blurred with tears, but even through them, I saw the final betrayal. Arthur reached once more into the trunk and pulled out the small velvet box, the very one I had discovered in his coat pocket. The pearls I had thought were meant for me now lay in his hand, ready to be given elsewhere. My chest constricted, my hope collapsing under the weight of truth. I pressed a trembling hand against the glass, unable to stop myself, my voice breaking in, a whisper that carried the force of years of denial finally unraveling. "I have to know," I said, turning to Paul, my tears glistening in the dim light of the dashboard. "I have to see who he's giving them to." The November air was brittle and sharp that night, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones no matter how tightly you wrap your coat around yourself. Paul and I stood in silence beneath the shadows of an old oak tree, its branches stripped bare by winter, our breath forming pale clouds that drifted upward before dissolving into the dark. Across the wide, manicured lawn stood the house where Arthur had disappeared. A grand two-story brick home with white columns and tall windows glowing like lanterns in the night. Every corner of it radiated wealth, comfort, and the kind of life I thought I once had. But tonight, standing there in borrowed courage beside my brother, I felt more like a stranger peering into a world that had never been mine at all. Through a wide front window, where lace curtains hung lightly pulled aside, I could see the interior awash in golden lamplight. The living room was decorated as if plucked straight from a magazine. Polished hardwood floors gleaming beneath an oriental rug, framed oil paintings lined carefully on the walls, and a Christmas tree. Yes, a full evergreen, despite it being Thanksgiving week, already trimmed with glass ornaments and silver tinsel that caught the light with every flicker. A fireplace crackled in the corner, sending shadows dancing along the walls, its warmth spilling over the elegant furniture arranged neatly around it. And there, at the center of that tableau, was the truth I had dreaded and yet could not look away from. On a velvet sofa, the color of wine, sat a young woman, no older than her early 30s. Her hair was raven black, falling in smooth waves down her shoulders, her skin luminous in the lamplight, and she wore a crimson dress that clung softly to her frame. She exuded the kind of beauty that turned heads without effort, the sort of presence both bold and graceful, all at once. Beside her, curled on the carpet with doll-like innocence, was a little girl of about 7, her face an echo of Arthur's, so unmistakably his that it stole the air from my lungs. The girl's nose, her deep-set eyes, the way she tilted her head in curiosity, all of it was him in miniature. I felt my knees weaken, and Paul's hand slipped instinctively around my arm, steadying me. His grip was firm, protective, the way he had held my hand when I was small and frightened of thunderstorms. I clung to that steadiness now, as if it were the only anchor keeping me upright. Arthur moved into view, his figure sharp in the tailored suit he had worn to our dinner, though now his tie was loosened and his smile unguarded. In his hands, he carried the very gifts that had haunted me for years: the silk scarf that had vanished from my sister's box, the silver watch I had chosen carefully for my father, the cashmere wrap meant for my mother. He presented them one by one with almost theatrical flourish, and I could see the young woman laugh lightly as she lifted the scarf to her neck, or how the girl clapped, in delight, as the watch glittered in her tiny hands. Each item landed like a blade in my chest. They were more than presents. They were pieces of my devotion, tokens of love that I had poured my heart into choosing, stolen and repurposed for another household. Watching them unwrapped there, in that gilded room, felt like watching my own life dismantled, stitch by stitch. Then came the final blow. Arthur reached into his coat pocket, the same pocket where I had weeks earlier discovered a small blue velvet box, and convinced myself, oh, how I convinced myself, that it was meant for me. He sank onto one knee before the young woman, his head bowed in mock ceremony, and opened the box with a flourish. From within, the pearls glimmered, each bead catching the lamplight with a luster so soft, so beautiful, I wanted to weep. The woman gasped, covering her mouth, tears shimmering in her eyes as he clasped the necklace around her throat. And then, without hesitation, Arthur kissed her. It was not a fleeting kiss, not the polite brush of lips one might give a casual companion. It was long, lingering, filled with a passion I had not seen in years. The child giggled, clapping her small hands as though this were a play performed for her delight. The sound pierced me more deeply than the sight. I felt the world tilt, the night spinning around me. My heart hammered with such force I thought it might burst, my breath caught somewhere between a cry and a sob. For a moment, I nearly crumpled to the ground. But Paul's arm tightened, his voice low and steady at my ear. "Stand tall, Margaret. Don't let him take more from you than he already has." Something within me shifted then. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps rage, perhaps the final thread of self-respect snapping taut. I straightened, wiped the tear that had streaked unbidden down my cheek, and stepped out from the cover of the oak tree. My heels crunched over the frosted lawn, each step measured, deliberate, as if I were marching toward the gallows yet unwilling to falter. Paul moved with me, but a step behind, giving me the space to lead this confrontation that was mine alone. The porch light glared down as I mounted the steps, its glow harsh and unforgiving. The wreath hung on the door, cheerful in its circle of holly and ribbon, mocked me with its domestic charm. My hand trembled only once before I steadied it and pressed the doorbell. From inside, the chime rang sweetly, almost absurdly gentle in contrast to the storm in my chest. I heard footsteps, his footsteps, approaching, slow at first, then quicker. The doorknob turned, and there he was. Arthur Dawson, my husband of more than a decade, stood framed in the doorway. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. His face drained of colour, lips parting as if to speak, but no sound emerging. His eyes widened, filled not with love or remorse, but with pure, unguarded terror. It was as though he had seen a ghost. "I'm Margaret Dawson," I said, my voice firm, though my hands trembled at my sides. "Arthur's wife." The words hung in the air like the toll of a heavy bell, reverberating through the golden light of that elegant living room. The young woman in the crimson dress froze, her eyes widening, the colour draining from her cheeks. For a long moment, she simply stared, as though her world had tilted beneath her. The little girl, clutching the silver watch in her tiny hands, looked between us with innocent confusion. Then she whispered a single word, one that struck me harder than any blow. "Daddy." The sound of it cracked something open inside me. Arthur flinched, his face taut with panic, his eyes darting between me, the woman, and the child. His mouth opened, but no words came, only the silence of a man caught in the collapse of the lies he had spun for years. The young woman turned to him then, her voice breaking. "Arthur." What is she saying? Tell me this isn't true. But the truth stood between us, undeniable, and no smooth charm of his could erase it now. Her hand flew to the pearls at her throat, the same pearls I had once convinced myself were meant for me. She tugged at them as if they burned her skin, her breath ragged, her face a mixture of shock and betrayal. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling freely as she shook her head. The child began to cry softly, frightened not by understanding, but by the storm of emotions flooding the room. She reached for her mother's hand, clinging tightly as her sobs rose. Arthur stumbled forward, reaching out as if to calm them both, but neither woman would allow it. The younger woman recoiled, her expression twisted with anger and grief. "How could you?" she spat, her voice trembling. "All these years? And you had a wife? A family of your own? You've lied to me, Arthur. You've lied to us." I felt my body sway, as if the air had thickened around me, but I did not collapse. Something inside me had solidified, turned from soft hope to cold iron. "It isn't just lies," I said quietly, my voice steady in the heavy silence. "It's theft. He gave you my family's gifts. Every one of them was stolen." The room spun with cries, with accusations, with silence too deep to fill. In that moment, the truth had no more need of me. It stood on its own, naked and raw, leaving destruction in its wake. I turned away, Paul's steady presence at my back, and walked into the cold night without waiting to hear more. Back home, I closed the door and locked it, something I had not done in 15 years of marriage. The click of that lock sounded final, like a seal pressed against the past. I leaned against the wood, breathing hard, the silence of the empty house pressing close around me. For the first time in years, the space felt wholly mine, though it echoed with sorrow. Later, as the night deepened, I wandered into Arthur's private office, a room he had always guarded fiercely. The desk stood polished and imposing, its drawers locked until I searched through them with trembling hands and found the key he thought I would never discover. Papers spilled out as I opened them, one after another, each page a revelation darker than the last. There were contracts with signatures that looked like mine but weren't. There were receipts from accounts I had never known existed, showing thousands of dollars shuffled back and forth. Tax forms altered, numbers crossed out, figures rewritten. Letters from clients who never received their goods, complaints hushed, settlements hidden. My husband was not only a liar, but a thief, a fraud, a man who had built his reputation on sand. I sat at his desk, the weight of the evidence heavy in my lap, my heart pounding as though it might break my ribs. The betrayal of the heart was one thing. I had braced for it, in some way, for years. But this was another level of deceit, one that reached into every corner of our lives. It was not only my love he had stolen, not only the gifts I had chosen for those I cherished. He had stolen my name, my trust, the very ink of my identity. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the mantel, steady and merciless. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches against the window, as though the world itself echoed my unrest. I pressed the forged papers against the desk, my voice a whisper, but as steady as I had ever heard it. "Not only a traitor of love," I murmured, my eyes burning with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "He's a criminal, a thief, and I will not let him win." I rose from the chair, the papers gathered in my trembling hands, and in that moment I knew. The story was no longer about a broken heart. It was about reclaiming my life. The papers lay heavy in my hands, their ink sharp against the lamplight, their truth undeniable. I gathered them carefully into a folder, each page a weapon forged from his deceit. My fingers trembled, but my resolve no longer wavered. Before dawn, I walked to the post office, the streets silent except for the crunch of my shoes on frosted pavement. The cold bit into my skin, but inside me burned a fire fierce enough to carry me forward. I addressed the envelopes, one to his company, another to the Internal Revenue Service, and sealed them with the weight of finality. In the weeks that followed, the consequences fell swiftly. Word spread that Arthur Dawson, once a man admired in Springfield for his polished manners and supposed success, had been dismissed from his firm. Investigators followed, ledgers examined, accounts frozen. By spring, bankruptcy consumed him, his name whispered with disdain in the same community that once praised him. The divorce, mercifully quick, left me with the house and the remnants of what we had built together. He left with nothing but his shame, the echo of a life undone by his own hand. I stood in that house, now quiet, stripped of pretense, and felt both the sting of loss and the sweetness of freedom. It was no longer a prison dressed in fine curtains, but a place I could reclaim, one room at a time. To fill its silence, I sought work. The bookstore on Main Street, small and lined with shelves that smelled of paper and ink, welcomed me behind its counter. The days there passed gently, surrounded by the voices of authors who spoke truths that outlived betrayal. I ran my hands across the spines of novels, helped children find their first stories, and found myself, in small, steady pieces, returning to life. In time, I wanted to give more. I joined a program at the county library, teaching adults to read, helping them trace the shapes of letters, watching their faces bloom with pride when words once foreign became familiar. Each lesson filled me with a purpose Arthur had never given me. Where his love had once been a chain, education became a key, unlocking not only their lives, but mine. It was there I met Richard Hale. He was in his early 40s then, a professor at the University of Illinois, tall, with kind eyes framed by spectacles, his salt and pepper hair more scholarly than severe. He wore tweed jackets with patches on the elbows, carried stacks of books under his arm, and had a way of speaking that made even silence feel rich with meaning. He noticed me at a volunteer meeting, his voice gentle as he asked about my work. I laughed, shy at first, but his presence was calm, steady, like a river smoothing jagged stones. Richard encouraged me to continue my education, to take classes I had once abandoned when marriage became my only occupation. I hesitated, embarrassed by the years lost, but he insisted with quiet conviction. "It's never too late, Margaret," he told me, his hand resting lightly on mine, his eyes sincere. "Your mind is as bright as any I've ever known." With his encouragement, I enrolled in evening courses, my nights filled not with doubt, but with discovery. What began as companionship deepened into something gentler, stronger. Over coffee shared in the library, over walks through campus beneath the arching oaks, love returned to me. Not the fevered passion of youth, but a mature devotion born of respect and kindness. In 1977, 10 years after my world first shattered, I walked down a simple church aisle in a pale blue dress, my hand in Richard's, my heart steady at last. The years that followed unfolded like a second life. Together, we built a home filled with books and laughter, where arguments ended not in slammed doors, but in conversation, where trust was not asked for, but given freely. I never forgot the wounds Arthur left, but Richard's love helped me see that scars can be the map that leads us to safer ground. Time moved on. The bitterness that once consumed me softened into a quiet strength. Arthur's decline reached me only in whispers. Failed ventures, dwindling health. A man alone at the edge of the life he once thought untouchable. Then, one winter long after Richard and I had built our new world, a package arrived at my door. Inside were the very gifts once stolen from me, returned with a letter written in a shaky hand. He confessed his regret, his shame, his solitude. He asked for forgiveness, not in hope of reunion, but in search of peace. I read the words slowly, my hands steady, my heart quiet. The sorrow was still there, but it no longer bound me. I set the letter down, touched the silk scarf, the watch, the pearls, and felt only distance. I whispered aloud to the empty room. You were already gone to me that night, Arthur, the night I stood at your door. At 88, I tell this story not to reopen wounds, but to share the truth that betrayal does not have to end us. It can, if we let it, become the soil where something stronger takes root. My life did not end in the shadow of Arthur's lies. It began anew, in the pages of books, in the faces of students learning to read, in the steadfast love of Richard Hale, and in the quiet dignity of forgiveness. Betrayal did not destroy me. It gave me back to myself. There are moments in life when the ground seems to vanish beneath us, when trust crumbles and the future feels like a darkened road with no end in sight. Yet time has a way of revealing something deeper, strength we did not know we carried, love we thought we had lost, and a self we had forgotten was still there, waiting to be found. This story reminds us that even in the face of heartbreak and betrayal, a new chapter is always possible. The seasons keep turning, the sun keeps rising, and so too can we rise from the ruins of what once was. Sometimes the hardest endings are simply the quiet beginnings of a life more true, more honest, more free. As you carry this story with you tonight, may it leave you with a little more hope, a little more courage, and the gentle knowing that it is never too late to begin again. Thank you for listening, dear friends. If these stories speak to your heart, I'd be honored if you subscribed or shared your thoughts below. Until we meet again, may peace rest kindly with you.